Welcome to the Art Against Mental Illness podcast. My name is Alex Lovelace and this is my podcast about the healing powers of art for artists, art lovers, the art curious and anyone with an interest in mental health and well-being. So this is another Art Takes episode. After the last one that I released, someone commented to me that they found the experience of listening to me noodle around with bits of artwork to be quite relaxing. So that's a result I'm quite happy with. So I'm going to release some more of these over the coming weeks. As ever, this was recorded on my headphone mic, so the quality is not great. There's a version of this on YouTube. I'll put the link in the show notes. That has some visuals with it. The second part was actually videoed, and I put some nice pictures on the video version where you'll get to see the actual picture that I was working on and some other bits and pieces. I think it's all very karmic and calm, so I hope you enjoy it and I hope it makes you feel mellow, and I'll be back again soon. Bye. Back in my studio. It's the end of November and thermometer in my studio reads 2 degrees Celsius. What's that? 30, 39 or something Fahrenheit. Thinking about decay. Something that is quite prevalent this time of the year with autumn and the leaves falling and ferns and foliage dying back. It's not a negative thing. Decay happens. Things grow and things die. Everything has its moment. And I quite like it. Much of the work I'm working on at the moment, to the artwork, is abstract, and one way or the other is sort of related to decay. It's just another natural process, and nature is quite good at finding ways to hide beauty in plain sight around processes that aren't themselves necessarily the most desirable processes. No one likes to see the end of something, but if that end is as beautiful as the golden or red leaves that adorn the countryside, certainly in the UK at the moment, then it's a good trade-off. Well, because of the slightly random way that I approach making art, and I tend to be quite experimental, but also a little bit lazy, and I'm very, clumsy. And so I tend to mess things up because I just can't stop tinkering, or I'm doing stuff and I go too far, cover everything in water and paint and all these sorts of things. And what happens is that things get messed up. I use acrylic paints almost exclusively, and they're plastic, really. They're supposed to be waterproof, and they are to a degree, but it really depends on the surface you put it on, the particular medium, the whether it's an expensive paint or a cheap one, all sorts of factors at play, whether it's gloss or matte, and the pigment used, and so if you paint some acrylic onto a surface and let it dry, then wet it again, sometimes it will bubble up. You've probably seen something similar if you've ever got the paints on your walls wet. And if you've done that in your house, someone splashed paint somewhere, splashed water or something on some paint and it started to bubble up, or maybe you've seen it around a leak in your ceiling. It's not desirable at all there. And I understand that, but it's actually quite a beautiful effect, and where the paint lifts off the surface when it's wet, and it bunches and puckers up. And I'm looking at a canvas at the moment where I've put several layers of paint on top of what was a very old painting that I'd never finished and I never really liked, and let it mostly dry, and then I've wet it again and dripped. I've wet it with various colours of heavily diluted acrylic ink, and we've got all these little amazing patterns coming up, and some of it looks quite organic, almost like the ridging and puckering you get around scars on your skin, like little tiny mountain ranges, and the paint and the water pulls in between them, and the shadows that they cast give it a really interesting texture. And of course, the trick here is that this is, well, I say this is going to dry. I've got the heater on, and I've applied the hairdryer to this a bit, but it's so cold in here that it's going to take a long time to dry. That irks me, but I think because it takes longer to dry, we get more of this effect. So I just need to be sort of patient. And when this dries up, this is part of the wonder of this type of process, is that I never really know how it's going to look. And and obviously this is making the paint and the medium more fragile. If I touch it now, I can just, wipe the paint off and destroy this. In fact, if I wanted to, I could scrape a lot of this back, and go back to the canvas, but I don't want to. I want to keep as much as effect as I can. So, I have to let it dry and hope that this texturing remains on the canvas. And then it's still, because it's lifted off the canvas, it's still going to be fragile. So if there's some of this texturing left at the end, when it's dry, I'll try and delicately seal it so that it's a little bit more sturdy and a bit more permanent. And I just really look forward to it. I think, I might get a bit antsy that things take too long to dry. Middle of summer, the opposite is true. Things dry too quickly, so I'm not very easy to please. But this process, when it takes longer, you're sort of stretching the time frame out when you get to as you get to enjoy the various stages. And I need to remind myself that art for me is all about the process, and part of that process is just watching things happen, whether it's a portrait emerging in front of me as I paint it, or whether I've created these organic effects, letting inks or water or whatever flow across a surface, and what they're going to do, and trying not to interfere with them. It's so intensely mindful. And this particular canvas, I put some texture on it already. I don't throw anything away. I've got a whole bag of cuttings of like A4 printer paper sheets that I've used for creating collage or as references from my printer. And so I've got loads of strips of edging offcut of varying different weights of paper, and I've just taken a bunch of these, and I just use PVA to stick them to the canvas. So they've created these ridges where it's just very slightly stands proud of the canvas, and then painted over that, and the paints are dried around it and stuck it to the canvas. And then the inks and stuff I've used sort of pulled down the edges, so it sort of created some structure in there. And so what I'm looking at the moment almost looks like an old board of I don't know, from a wall or a cupboard or something that's been left outside to decay. But I've done it under sort of very controlled circumstances. But there's something quite industrial about it. And I like photographing sort of decayed, industrial, rusty and flaky surfaces when I'm out and about in a city or in the town or even in the country, and you see it everywhere. And I think people don't notice it, but I do, and I find a real power and beauty in that. And I don't really think about it in terms of, do I like that it's decaying? Is it the fact that it's decaying that I like it, or is it the fact that it's just beautiful? And I think it's the latter. I think it's really interesting and beautiful and organic. And you can walk out and of your door and see sort of organic structures and forms and shapes and growths and stuff anywhere you like, with its trees and fields or just plants in your garden or by the side of the road. And I think firstly, you sort of get used to seeing that. It starts to feel a little bit monochrome, and 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 I think you should spend some time looking more closely at this stuff, because it's all got its beauty. But this type of sort of industrial or modernistic decay of things like paints and rust and so on has got its own beauty and its own organic fractal nature. What I've really noticed in the last couple of months, when I've pretty much been exclusively experimenting with abstract works of a sort of either fully sort of organic or sort of industrial organic nature, you do things like I created a sort of a mixture of PVA and acrylic medium, and I just purely by accident one day dropped some ink, acrylic ink into it, and it started creating all these beautiful little fractal patterns, like little trees with lots of little branches, and that would join and spread and spread, and they keep spreading, and I just watch I get so mesmerized by them, and they create so many lots of little distinct unique patterns that won't be seen anywhere else ever again, like proper chaotic fractal patterns, like a snowflake. And I can go on for hours about chaos theory, fractals and non-linear dynamics, and all these things that relate to types of order emerging from highly unordered, high entropy systems. And maybe one day I'll do an episode on chaos and introduce some of these concepts. I don't want to scare too many people away because it gets quite heavy duty quite quickly. But I think if you're an artist, you've seen these types of thing. I think especially sort of watercolor artists, where you're doing wet on wet, wet on dry, and the different effects you get are hard to control and highly organic, and produce absolutely incredible patterns and shapes and textures, and you'll have observed the swirls and the fractals and stuff in it, and I hope you delight in that. And you should sort of sit there and watch it rather than hoping it will dry, because that's really the best part. And what's incredible about this is no one else gets to see it. So once my little fractal patterns dry, then they're really hard to see, and they sort of lose a bit of their distinction and their definition, and they're still amazing, but they're not the thing that I saw when I was making it. And I've tried various approaches to trying to lock these in, but all of them either end in roughly the same outcome or sort of ruin the color and the shapes and the organic nature of it. So it doesn't really work, and it's a real shame. And I've genuinely been considering setting up my camera. You know, I really need like a good macro lens, something that can get real close up, and just making some videos of these things emerging, because I'm like, well, look, you can see this work of art now, right, when it's finished, and I think you'll like it, but you missed the best part. You know, you missed the most exciting, fun bit, and the drama that unfolded, and only I got to see that. And I sort of feel like I'm denying the world something here, because it's one of the most engrossing things you can watch. And if you're the sort of person who likes watching clouds mutate, or you can get mesmerized by a leaf floating around in a stream, or you know, anyone who likes observing processes, I get absolutely mesmerized by things like factory conveyor belts and anything that's sort of repetitive and but is doing something that feels like it's achieving something. And you know, I can just get lost by just watching things like that. And so any sort of process for me, I find wonderful. And of course, there's processes everywhere, and you know, some are slower and some are faster. And the beginning of spring is such a magical time for me. It's like Disneyland gets invited into my world once a year for free, as you watch the natural world rise up and recreate itself and create new things that are the same but different. And you know, going to my garden and watching what's coming out, whether the shoots are shooting up and things are sprouting, and just the excitement of it all, and everything is so vibrant and new and fresh, and you see these processes sort of unfolding, and it's actually, you know, in one sense it's quite slow, and you're sort of willing that bulb to sprout into a daffodil or whatever. But on the other hand, you know, you don't want it to stop, and sometimes it feels like it happens really quick, and so maybe you have to go away for a bit to a city where you don't see much of it, and you come back a few days or a week later, and everything sort of exploded. The trees that didn't have leaves on them a week ago are suddenly a big wash of pale greens and yellows, and blocking out the sun and soaking up all its energy, and it's just so dramatic, and I think people miss it. I think I'm not going to berate people for looking down at their phones all the time. I'm every bit as guilty as that as other people, but I uh, I really think that you've got to turn it off every now and again, and lift your head up and look around, and maybe not everyone's as mesmerized by the processes of nature. For me, it's it's architecture. I mean, just walking around the town and the city, people forget to look up. And over that row of shops, there's always some really interesting buildings, especially if your town's been around for a while. And if you go down the Octorada High Street, Octorada is just one big long road. It's called the Lang Toon, the Long Town, and there's such a mishmash of architecture, and you see a lot of this sort of mixture of newer stuff, older stuff, ugly 70s brutalism, and really ancient, like you know, Victorian era and older. There's even a fragment of a castle in one place, and some stunning old manor house buildings, and lots of decay, lots of broken down farming buildings and the like, and they just look around you and there's so much to see, and it's just a little town that no one's heard of. You know, 5,000 people live here, but it's just so much to see if you just lift your head up and take a look around. And if that don't float your boat, we've got the mountains, you know, on the horizon, sort of in both directions. You can look from here directly into the highlands and the Grampians, and there's so much to see. And what I love about this place is that it's never the same 2 minutes in a row. The Scottish weather is at best variable, and but there's so much dramatic scenery to see. There's so much character in every direction that you look, and you never get bored with the views, because you never see the same view twice. And because the views are so big, because the vistas are so grand, there's always some drama to see somewhere. And why do you need, you know, the latest Kardashian or football wife spat on your phone when you've got that? And again, I'm not begrudging people that stuff. I just think you need to make time and space for other things, the glorious world around you, because there's a whole bunch of people hell bent on destroying it, and maybe these processes won't be visible for too much longer. And if they're not, then I've got my paints, and I've got my decay and my bubbling surfaces, and and little mountain ranges and splashes and washes of color and fractal explosions, just magnificent contrast and textures. It's really hard not to touch it, because I like to, especially when I've got a lot of texture in a picture, I like to touch it because it just feels nice. It feels interesting, and I'll destroy this if I touch it. I have to wait until it dries. I did once consider making one or more artworks that are highly textured and built to be touched, so that you could put them up in a gallery and people would be encouraged to touch it, and it would sort of wear away over time, and you could sort of keep turning it around so that different bits of it get touched, move it to different places, move it at different heights, and just keep moving. So it's this living artwork that that changes over years and years, very slightly, very slowly, as people wear away bits of it. It's the next day now, and I'm back in my studio. My studio is a total mess, but I've come back to see my the artwork that I was playing around with yesterday. So let's see how we've got on. I took it into the house last night because I wanted to let it dry a lot. It was on one of my radiators, and it's dried, I think, completely, so I can now touch it, and there's nothing coming off. And I'm looking at where all of the sort of bubbling and the ridges, and where the paint was made wet, and it's all completely dried now, and it's kept a lot of its texture, actually, way more than I thought. When I first looked at it this morning, it wasn't in very good light, and I thought it had sort of flattened out and sort of disappeared, and it has definitely flattened out, but it's still very much there, and it's, if anything, there's some new features come out of it. There's a real sort of mixing of colours coming on here, and where the paint, the inks have pooled in between ridges and so on. There are definitely features of this. It feels like almost like an alien landscape, because I'd actually put some pretty big blobs of, what was it? Oh, I found some old blobs of paint stuck to an easel, and I pulled those off and stuck them on to give it a bit of texture, and they're almost like mountains. So you can imagine we're looking down at the surface of an alien planet, and you can go around and over it, and there's lots of different terrain, and the colours are really vibrant and in this light, and there's definitely different regions of this, and there's little bits that are really, really interesting, and I'm always sort of tempted with stuff like this to cut it up into little pieces, because there's a whole that I think it's cool. I think I need to have a little bit more of a tinker with it, but it feels quite balanced, which is really my litmus test. But there's so many little regions on here that could be broken up into smaller artworks, or make a little grid of them, and I think that would be cool. But what I also think would be cool is just not doing that and leaving it the hell alone. I need to resist the urge to tinker here. I feel like doing is just working on a few bits to bring out some of the features, and maybe I will, but I've got a nasty tendency to mess things up, and I don't want to do that. Maybe this is done, and there's nothing more to do. But this is just the beginning of the next phase, because some of these bits of paint I think are quite fragile, so I have to seal them a bit, and I then have to decide how I want to varnish it, or whether I want to varnish it. I think it has to be varnished, given the amount of abuse that I've given this canvas to protect it, and so I have to wait for it to dry before I can do that. And then what type of varnish do I want? And sometimes it seems obvious that you'll use, say, a gloss varnish, because because it's sort of it tends to really bring out the colour. But I did some gloss some stuff the other day, and it actually didn't work. It wasn't the right approach for those particular paintings. Where I've used graphite to create a sheen, and the gloss varnish actually ended up dulling it. It had more of a sheen on it before I varnished it, so I've got to be careful here. And then it's buckled a bit overnight because I had it on the radiator. It's only on canvas board, and it's pretty crappy, cheap old bit of canvas board. So if someone wants to put this on their wall, it's not in a state to do that. So it would need to be reinforced somehow and framed. And again, none of these are particularly arduous tasks, but it's all stuff that I've got to make decisions about, and I don't have a lot of money, so I can't really afford to put a really nice frame on this. And it's quite conceivable that I just have to leave it how it is until I can afford to get it framed. And that seems a bit of a shame because I just think I've been messing around with abstract for weeks now, and I'm now starting to, find my feet with this a bit. And this is probably one of my favourites I've done so far. My love of vibrant colours has really come out in this one, and I'm almost tempted to try and bring them out a little bit more, but there's a danger that I'll end up unbalancing it and making it worse. It's such a difficult thing at this point to just stop and say no, just leave it alone. And sometimes I've had to get people to tell me to just stop and leave it alone, and I've had to do that to other people too. But it's just I almost don't want to finish working on it because I've really enjoyed doing it. And where do I start with the next one? I'm running out of canvases at a rate of knots, and when I put things away, I tend to put them away and forgetting about them, and I never really look at them quite as much again. And I don't really know. I'm not a backwards looking person. I don't tend to do that, and so it's a bit of a shame because I think I often miss the pleasure of going back and really looking at stuff that I've created. But in terms of creating something organic and something dramatic, I guess what I wanted with this is dramatic, and my favourite abstract works are all quite dramatic and full of colour and texture and just lots of interesting details, and it's absolutely what I've achieved with this. Maybe you like it, maybe you won't, maybe abstract is not your thing, but if you're looking at this and you don't see something in it that you find beguiling or even disturbing or uncomfortable, I think there's something in here, and that anyone can at least appreciate. And I'd like to, I'd say I take credit for this, and I'm blowing my own trumpet and saying, well, this is a good work of art. Maybe it isn't. Maybe it's just good for me. But I sort of didn't make it. Nature made this, and the environment made it, and I feel like it was a sort of a teamwork. It was a partnership, and that's what I really, really enjoy. And so I don't mind standing here going, look at this cool thing that I made, because like anything I've made, it's only partly me. And now, as I show it to the world, it's one way or the other, partly you, unless you expunge your brain of all memory of it. But it's like a bit of a celebration for me. I'm really, really quite pleased with how this has come out, and I'll try not to tinker, and I will tell you if I do, and you can be suitably angry at me unless I actually improve it. All my sensible instincts are telling me to leave it the hell alone, and that's maybe what I'll do, I guess. Watch this space to find out.